On average, how much do you typically keep in your checking account for daily or monthly expenses? I am curious about how much you all keep in your checking accounts for daily, monthly expenses. Is there a recommended amount? I don't have any debt. I rent and own my car. No kids. I am also maxing out my retirement accounts. 457b, HSA, and Roth. And I've allocated all of my emergency fund to a HYSA. Also, I am saving money for a down payment, as I focus on putting more money away towards tax-advantaged accounts. I want to know what a healthy range is to maintain in my checking account. Is there a rule of thumb? Like having 1 month's worth of expenses? More than I need, because I don't like having to babysit it. I'm lazy. Same. Several times a year. I'm like, damn, that's too much. So I initiate a transfer to the HYSA. I would make more in interest if I was more diligent. But I'm used to HYSAs paying less than 1%. So it wasn't a big deal back then. Yep. People on Reddit love talking about HSAs are at 5%. But they were literally less than 1% for fucking decades. Both checking and savings accounts didn't earn you shit for years. If you wanted to make money on your money, it wasn't gonna be through an HYSA. It's a relatively new phenomenon. I leave a bunch in my checking just as a nice thick buffer. Money goes into my 401k and HYSA automatically from payroll. I think people love saying that to get people on the high interest HYSAs because no one knows how long it will stay that way. And the more time spent gaining greater than equals 4 APY, the better. When I opened mine around 2017-2018, it was giving me over 3%. Went down to 1% until it slowly bumped back up with high interest rates. HYSA over 1% are not a relatively new phenomenon. Hell, savings paid an average of 8% in the 80s. Savings rates are definitely cyclical. Nothing new about that. Amex HYSA is 4.35%. Might not have been then, but it is now. We know it's a new phenomenon. It's just like, why not take advantage of it while it's possible? No risk, all reward. Just for switching where your autopay comes from during a morning shit. I get shit for interest on my checking account, so I keep about $2,000 in there at any given time. Just to cover day-to-day and bills when they pop up. Then move in money from my HYSA when needed. Same, I typically have about $2 minus $4K in there depending on when the paycheck and bills hit. Sophie offers interest on checking and savings accounts. Wait, do you mean 2K in general or 2K after all your bills for the month? Because my mortgage alone is more than 2K, so that wouldn't work for me. No. Mortgage is paid from my HYSA. 2K in general as a base. I get paid bi-weekly, so I'm adjusting things every day. But I have everything forecast easily, so it only takes about 5 to 10 minutes to reconcile. I don't intentionally keep any type of barrier in my checking. My expenses all go on my credit card, so there's no risk of going negative. But I can easily move money from my HYSA if there's an emergency expense. There are HYSA that offer checking features as well. I have Wealthfront, which is 5% APY, and all my bills are paid directly from that. Plenty. We use CIT Platinum Savings with $500 in the checking account in case we need cash or something. For our joint primary expense account and individual Sophie savings accounts for our discretionary spending. Everything auto-pays on credit card or out of the CIT account. Non-retirement investing transfers out of CIT on a monthly basis, and I do a manual additional transfer as we accumulate too much in that account. With rates high as they are right now, we let that get to 1.5x monthly expenses before it gets a haircut. Yes, I've thought about doing this too, but I've been lazy up until this point. My job doesn't make changing my auto deposit easy. Maybe I'll change it eventually. But your credit card bills are paid with your checking, as are things like a mortgage, rent, car payment, student loans, etc. Do you micromanage when they are all due to make sure you have the exact amount in your checking, rather than have a flat amount as a standard minimum? I pay my credit card bills directly from my accounts earning 5%. It's 2024, this is possible to do. I consolidated everything to Fidelity for 5% funds away from my local checking earning 0.5%. Set up my CMA to automatically pull money from the taxable account. Works fantastic. Until my landlord switched rent software and I got hit by a non-payment and late payment fee. Because the new software somehow pulls your linked bank account to see if you have enough to cover the auto payment. Now I keep a couple months' rent in cash management. You are making things unnecessarily complicated. If that taxable brokerage account is just for keeping money in to earn interest, then you can just use that account. You can order checks for that account. You can order a debit card for that account. You can do bill pay from that account. You can set up ETF/ACH transfer to and from that account. The only thing you can't do with that account is get ATM fees reimbursed. For that you can just keep your CMA account set up the way it is and use that debit card on the rare occasions you need cash. I have it set to pay the minimum amount automatically for credit cards in case something happens. But in reality I go in each month and pay the previous month's entire thing in full. Basically, an entire month's paycheck minus my rent and a couple utilities is sitting in my account until the next month, when I get a new paycheck and pay the previous month's credit card bills. So it's not that there is no money in my checking. Obviously that's where my paycheck is deposited. And so it usually has enough money at all times to pay the next cycle of credit cards, but I am not intentionally saving money in my checking account. Same. I keep a few hundred, then everything rise in a HYSA. I do zero-based budgeting. And I leave my budgeted sinking funds etc. in the checking ACCT. All other funds are moved elsewhere. I also never use a debit card and don't have one associated with my checking ACCT. I use credit cards and pay in full from payments from checking ACCT for budgeted categories. I'm the same pretty much. I have a checking account that gets $380 put into it every 2 weeks and that's my spending money. Entertainment, gas, groceries, clothes, etc. Everything else gets either paid immediately when I get paid from a separate checking account for specific bills or moved to a savings account bucket. All spending purchases go through credit and I pay back and track where I am in my budget to ensure I don't go over. What is zero-based budgeting? AKA the envelope system. All money that you receive is categorized upon receipt. You have $0 unaccounted for. If you are short in one category, you cover the shortage from another category rather than letting it go negative, go into debt. YNAB is probably the best known zero-based budgeting app. Oh, okay, thank you. I have established budgets for each bill and category. Then $700 per week slush so I don't have to worry about my wife's spending habits. Wow, we're exactly the same. My other funds are put in my HYSA. I don't understand people that don't use zero-based budgeting. I'll say something like, I zero out my checking account every pay period, and get quite a few stares from it. I mean they can budget however they want. I just don't understand how they do. Same. I buy everything with my credit cards which I pay off every month when I get paid. After those are paid I transfer everything except about $100 to other accounts. Never used my debit cards. They're in my safe just in case I randomly need cash when the banks are closed. A month's expenses ensures nothing bad happens. Same, but I'm usually 2 months. I use YNAB for budgeting and always make sure I'm budgeted for next month at the beginning of the Previous month. This doesn't include my emergency fund, which is fully funded but stays dormant. I think 2 is better, even if purely because something small shouldn't cause a problem. I mean, something like gas goes from 4.50 a gallon to 5, or kid has a field trip. Sure, you could make more if you really monitored it, but really, is it worth the stress? If you can afford it, to juggle $2 or $3 a month instead of monitoring the account like a hawk. I've always done 2 months because I don't like having to think about it. Before interest rates went up, I only had a checking account. I just hate the hassle. But not in checking, I hope. Which is what OP is asking about. If you are holding thousands in a no-interest, negligible interest account, that seems wrong in most cases. Same. 1 month in my checking and another in my savings. Just in case. Everything else goes straight to my HYSA. My DD goes into my checking account. And then I transfer out everything beyond my forecasted, budgeted expenses. Works out to roughly 1x 1.5x monthly expenses at any given time. This, plus a buffer to account for miscalculations, unexpected. They don't happen often, but better safe than sorry. I also do 1x 1.5x monthly expenses. And that is my buffer. I get paid twice a month. So without a buffer I would have 0x 0.5x monthly expenses in my checking. You end up with a whole month of buffer when doing it this way. Ah, yes. That makes sense. So min balance is basically a month of expenses. Whereas it probably cuts closer for me, depending on where in the month we are. Makes sense. In case something really serious happened that impacted income, it would hold you over while you, or partner, etc., had to scramble to deal with whatever that was. Yep. Also note that this is my checking account. I have a separate HYSA for my emergency fund. With 3 months of expenses tucked away in it, I can easily transfer that over if things really hit the fan. Yeah, I do this. Mostly because my checking account charges me fees if I don't do direct deposit. Or I have to keep $5K at all times in the account. No thanks. Otherwise I would DD into my Cash Plus account, since it has a routing number and you can charge to it, which I do with my credit card bills and my car loan. Sounds like your bank didn't really want your business. You should fire them and find a bank that doesn't play stupid games. It's a common theme with people who have very little to put into a bank besides a paycheck. There's thousands of banks out there that don't charge monthly fees. People just don't care enough to make the switch and end up paying. Including this bank, Chase. The person opted for a different account for whatever reason, usually interest rate, benefits, a pretty debit card, etc. Or Chase picked them up in college. No, that would be basic checking, which is free. Chase does not have a $0 monthly fee account for adults with no qualifying activity. It's Chase Bank. Not great, but there's some comfort in having an account with the biggest bank in the US, I guess. I have credit cards with them and they're good about that. The fees thing is stupid. Yes. But a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things. Do you have the Premier checking account? I had that and got charged a fee because I had like $1,000 in it. Not enough to clear the fee threshold. And moved the rest of my savings and DD to my Sophie account, since if you set up DD with Sophie, their savings account APY jumps to 4.6%. Then I got like a $50 fee charged to my Chase account and called them and didn't realize that pulling away my DD caused the fee, so I asked them to change my Chase account to their basic checking, which has a much lower minimum, and had them remove the fee. Only use my Chase ACCT now to pay off my CC, or if I need cash once in a blue moon. Sounds like a liability at this point. Why not just close it? Why does them being the biggest make them better? IDK. Man. You do you. But I'd rather vote with my wallet. Having good credit products doesn't make a good deposit product experience. Just ask Citi. Similar to me. DD goes in. I pay off my credit cards, anything like that. Automatically $300 to brokerage account. Once I get to a certain threshold, typically 2x monthly rent, automatically deposit 1.5x into brokerage account, HYSA. It's like extra monies. That's pretty close to where I'm at. We have 2 premium checking accounts here in Canada, where certain benefits are available for keeping $3,000 minus $4,000 in each account, and penalties for falling below those values. So saving on premium CC fees, safe deposit boxes, etc., also keeps us around the safe buffer we want for cash. Every couple of paychecks, money is moved into brokerage accounts. I put everything on a credit card and pay it off every month, so when I get my direct deposit, I calculate how much I'm going to need to pay before my next paycheck between my 2 credit cards that I usually use plus student loans. Then everything else gets transferred to HYSA and personal investment account. I keep maybe a $200 cushion in case I have to use Venmo for something like at the farmer's market. $200 just sounds terrifying. I typically don't let my checking get below $5,000, but that's just my comfort zone. About a month's worth of expenses. Checking accounts are some of the most vulnerable accounts, as they tend to be the accounts we use to interact with outside parties that by definition have the power to pull money out of them. They are also some of the toughest to get your money back from, as the fraud protections aren't nearly as good as they are with credit cards, and banks often make it a painful, long process before they will give money back if they ever do. Even when mistakes happen that aren't at all your fault, it is often a painful, long process. It is going to depend how you use it. An account you use just for ACH transfers to credit card providers, utilities, etc., will be vastly safer than if you carry a debit card, write physical checks, or use Zelle, Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Apple Cash, whatever. If you do those sort of things, I would advise not keeping any more money in the account than you can afford to lose. Or at best be without for days, weeks, months. I certainly do not keep a full month's worth of expense in mine. My employer's deposit schedule happens to land a business day before most of my bill due dates. Partially by chance and partially because I changed due dates where possible. So I personally have direct deposit set up to partition out the typical amount I need for these bill payments. It means some months I have to be aware of things and transfer some more in from savings, and it means some months I have to transfer extra out. But it is the strategy that makes the most sense to me in terms of convenience combined with not risking too much. Beyond that, I keep maybe a couple of $100 for random day-to-day spending. Of course, the benefit beyond just the safety aspect is that it encourages me to move money to better long-term accounts. This my thought process exactly. Reading the responses in the thread, it appears most people are blissfully ignorant to the plethora of horror stories in this subreddit, where thousands of dollars are misplaced by the bank, stolen outright, wrong account number keyed in, etc. And the bank has the power to say, "Oh well," and take their sweet time righting the wrong. Too risky IMHO. I have a separate checking account for things like Venmo, PayPal, etc. I keep a few $100 in there for random things. And then I don't really have to be concerned if there is any sort of vulnerability. Same here. Not sure what emergency would require a month of expenses worth of cash on that same day. If I ever need more, I transfer from my savings and have it in 1 to 2 days, but it doesn't make sense to me to keep more than $500 when it's not gaining interest. 1 month of bills is a common rule of thumb. Personally, I keep half a month, which depends on the bills that fall within the first or second half of the month. Everything else gets allocated to savings. Only takes a day or two to move money from a HYSA into checking. Some banks will expedite for free, which only takes a few minutes. We keep 2 months worth. The reason for this is that's enough so you don't have to pay your bills based on billing cycles. And ensuring there is enough in the account. We have a direct deposit in a set amount that goes in to top it off. We've figured out the right day in the month to pay everything where nothing is late. We then just go into bill pay and pay them all in one day. No muss. No fuss. Doing bills takes all of 10 minutes once a month, and you have an exact record of when, how much, etc. you can always refer to. Next paychecks come in and top it back off and repeat. It took us a few months to figure out the right top off amounts. But after that it's worked for 15 plus years. Next, a set amount goes into a brokerage account. All our tax-advantaged accounts are maxed out, and the remainder is swept into a savings account at another bank. Direct deposit into Fidelity brokerage account that has checks and holds cash in a 5% plus money market fund. All expenses go on credit cards if possible. Otherwise auto drafted out of brokerage account. Credit cards on auto pay from brokerage account. No need to split checking and savings or juggle money between accounts this way. I don't understand how this strategy is not more popular. Nothing better than getting 5% on what's effectively a checking account. I map out my cash flow 6 months in advance. I know exactly when all my bills and paychecks will hit my account. Then I strive to have no more than $500 at the low point. I put everything else in savings. Yes, exactly. Why keep anything excess in a 0.1% account? We don't keep money in our checking account. We bank with Sophie and get approximately 4.5% on our savings. So we keep our money there. All expenses go on a credit card we pay off monthly from the savings account. Our rent is set up on auto pay out of savings. And we maximize what we can earn on our combined spending money and emergency savings. Do you get checks through Sophie? Sorry, never heard of them before and have majority of my money sitting in Chase sadly. You have to order them. But yes, we have checks. I had only heard of them from getting mail about refinancing student loans, so I was super confused. When my husband said we should open an account with them, tears of joy. They've actually been really great and their referral program isn't too bad either. We do keep an account with Citi, so we have a physical bank to go to if we need it. Like when we moved, we needed a cashier's check for our deposit, which required going to a bank. Around a month-ish of expenses, but everything that can goes on the CC anyways. So usually enough to pay that off monthly. $2K to cover my CC bills every month. Basically none. Basically everything is auto pay on one of the last few days of the month. Or goes on my CC. Direct deposit goes in 2x a month and then my CCI payoff plus mortgage and rent. Before moving all but maybe $100 to savings. Almost none. 99% of our expenses go on the Costco credit card, which gets paid in full when we're paid. The only thing that doesn't is rent, but that gets taken out as soon as whatever paycheck is closest to the first hits, and I pay that manually. Normally right before a paycheck hits, we only have like $30 to $100 left over in checking. There's never a fear of overdraft though, because we literally never use debit cards anymore. Everything outside of bills gets sent to investment accounts, HYSA. I keep about 1 month's worth of expenses in checking. I keep a $5,000 minimum floor. Note: I am a recent college grad and still live at home with my parents. $500 in checking. $5 to $10K in my savings. Aside from other HYSA. Transfer over rent and credit card totals to my checking for direct debit once they're due. Why do you separate HYSA and savings? No financial reason. Mostly just mental separation of my long-term stocks, savings accruing interest, and my everyday account at a local bank. Ah, that's fair. For me, I have two separate savings accounts because with my bank I can't open a checking account without a savings account as well. I get a laughably small interest rate on that account. So I keep a HYSA with another bank. I mentally separate the two because one is actually useful. The other is basically for decoration lol. I do separate savings and HYSABC. It takes so long to move money back and forth, and if something comes up I want to be able to act immediately. IDK. Kinda sounds silly writing it down BC. I know when everything is due ahead of time. Somewhere between 5 to 8K. I have about 9 to 12 months in my savings. Enough to get out of the country quickly. Which is the same as 1 month's income. We aim for 15K because our checking is also a HYSA up to 15K. Makes life easier because we don't have to worry about overdrawing our checking and move money out to a savings account. Same here. 15K. I like to have enough money available so I can fly anywhere. Or even put a down payment on a car and get out of town. I live a boring, law-abiding life. But having the ability to run if things get weird is important to me. You should not keep any money in checking as of now. The transaction limit has been removed from savings accounts since COVID, so you can use them as checking to pay bills. You can use credit cards for other stuff and link auto pay to savings. Besides that, if you need some cash on the occasions, just transfer that amount to your checking. I'm surprised that there are this many people keeping their money in checking. I keep $10,000 in it, but it also doubles as my 3 months expenses. My bank also requires me to do auto withdrawals for my mortgage from an account with them. So I understand there is some opportunity cost lost not having it in an HYSA. But it's small enough that I don't care about it. When I go over that 10K, I'll just transfer excess to whatever investment goal till I hit that. Roth IRA. 529. Or save a little more for a future upcoming expense. Whatever. When all those goals are hit and there's still some above 10K, that excess goes into a taxable brokerage account. For example, right now there's like 15K in checking account. I have to buy flight tickets for summer vacation and want to buy a pinball machine too. Altogether that's gonna be like 7 grandish. Tomorrow I'll get paid about 6K. Brings me up to 21K. Buy the tickets and pinball. Brings me down to 14K. Probably throw 3K into 529 as it's the first investment goal for the year. Brings me down to 11K. The next couple weeks till L payday will probably incur 1K of random expenses. Back to 10K floor. Works very well for us. Roughly 1.5 months of predictable expenses in a dedicated checking account. This includes mortgage, utilities, and insurance. It goes up and down a bit as utilities vary seasonally, or as car insurance is paid every 6 months. The 1.5x amount is just so that I do not have to look at it too closely. I do not keep groceries or similar in that checking account. I have a different checking account that I use for that, and it normally sits at about $1,000. I move a bit into that account when credit card statements come out. My paycheck comes in at the beginning of the month and my bills at the end. So I keep around $400, which is enough to cover anything incidental, and then move the amount that covers my bills back in from my HYSA on like the 29th or 30th of the month. We normally keep 2 to 3 months of expenses in checking. If it gets over 3 months, we move some to savings. We keep a short-term savings for things like vacations and other larger purchases in the same bank. They are not linked, so the savings is not accessible with a debit card. We need to go online and move the money if we want to access it. We keep a long-term savings account in a separate bank for our emergency fund. We also pay car payments into that account so we can pay cash for our cars at some point. Mine typically has no more than $10,000 in it. Anything above that usually lands in savings. Enough to pay bills. If you have created a budget, you know how much this is per month. Expenses go on credit cards that get paid off every week. To harvest points. If I have an emergency, it goes on the credit card and then paid off from savings. The only emergencies I can think of that wouldn't be covered are travel related or an insurance deductible. I have more than enough in savings to cover the deductibles. My monthly expenses are about $4,000. I keep a nice even $5,000 in checking. My paycheck is DD. And at the end of the month, when all my credit card bills from last month are paid off, I transfer everything above $5,000 to my other accounts. HYSA, brokerage, etc. I keep 1 month of expenses in my checking account. At the beginning of the month, I move anything over that amount from paychecks to my savings. Guys, you can sign up for an account that earns you 5%. Free checks, free debit cards, all debit card fees reimbursed, bill pay, and lets you make ETF/ACH transfers to or from. All available by large institutions that know how to handle money. Which institution is this? Fidelity, Morgan Stanley, Charles Schwab, Wealthfront, etc., etc., etc. Pretty much any brokerage has set up schemes to give you a banking hub around 5%. Sophie gets a lot of good words. Hell, even Amex has checking and a HYSA at 4.35%. Here's a link to the PF Wiki. Our Personal Finance Wiki Index. *** for helpful guides and information. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit. Message compose to equals **r Personal Finance. If you have any questions or concerns. Enough to cover upcoming expenses. Other than that, everything is in Fidelity or 401k. I stay a month ahead. So when I end the month and reconcile my budget, I have enough in there to fund the next month. I am a compulsive credit card payer though, so the balance drops about once a week as I zero off my CC balance. Enough to float me until the next paycheck and cover any extra expected expenses. I also keep a small savings account connected to cover small unexpected expenses. Everything above that goes to either high-yield accounts or investments. Get multiple checking accounts. One for your personal expenses such as gas, food, and small random stuff. Another for fixed costs such as rent, mortgage, electricity, insurance, internet, phone, subscriptions, and other big, annual costs such as registration, car maintenance, etc. Basically, one bucket is for fixed known costs known, the other for frequent small variable transactions. It makes accounting much more easier and you don't need remember about that random burrito you ate. Keep the first one to the bare minimum budget. The other keep 2 or 3 months reserve. The rest should be invested in short, medium, long-term financial vehicles or assets. I try to keep no less than $1,500 in my checking at all times just to be safe. $4,000. Brokerage moves money from brokerage account to checking to maintain 1.5x my monthly expenses, just for peace of mind that nothing will bounce. About $10K. Mortgage is $6,000 and the rest covers other bills, groceries, eating out, kid expenses, etc. Just saying. You could have a HYSA and keep the bulk of it in the HYSA to gain interest you are giving up. $400 to $500 per year. Not huge but not nothing. $15K a month goes out of checking to investments and savings. That is great. The $10K sitting in your checking could still generate interest. You might not worry about the extra 0.25%. That is fine. Still, you are losing out on that. My direct deposit goes straight to checking and have money moved automatically to my money market. I try to keep 1 to 2 months of expenses in there. I travel for work and it can be up to 45 days until I get reimbursed. So I see a lot of ups, downs and like the extra buffer. When it hits 3 months expenses, I move enough to my money market to get back down to 1.5 months. The only time I've pulled back into checking in the last 2 years is for property taxes, but that's pre-planned and is roughly 2 months of my expenses amount, so it'd wipe me out if I didn't. I do about a month and a half of expenses, so that my credit card and other bill autopays can hit without incident. But I still have a small buffer in case I spent more that month for something unexpected or infrequent. 1K in checking with a local branch. 1K checking in online-only bank. Expenses spread across a few HYSA accounts with autopay. CCs, utilities, car note etc. Rest goes to investment account unless emergency savings or short-term goals need funding. This probably isn't the best advice, but I really don't keep much in there. Maybe $500 minus $1,000 just 'cause that's how the cookie crumbles sometimes, but it's not intentional. It's probably a little irrational, but I just hear stories of people's checking accounts getting emptied due to fraud and protections aren't great. And money in a checking account is doing nothing for me, so I keep most in my money market fund. Basically I put everything on a credit card and then pay it off on payday. It's sound STR/SFIL because I'm technically using next week's paycheck for this week's expenses, but I'm not really. Because I'm way on top of savings every paycheck. I just don't like keeping money in my checking account, and I never overspend on my budget. Emergencies not included obviously. It works for me. Greater than, is there a rule of thumb? Like having 1 month's worth of expenses? That's about where I aim. Basically, if I end February with enough of a balance already in checking to cover all expected withdrawals for March, then I don't have to do the "will this bill withdraw before or after that paycheck" dance. I've been in that situation during first few years out on my own, and I didn't like it. There's also that buffer if there's a hiccup around pay deposits being delayed. I make budgeted transfers from checking out to various savings, rebuilding of emergency fund cash, savings, IRA contributions. So over the course of 2 to 3 months the amount flowing in from pay is roughly equal to money going out to spending plus saving. The daily balance bounces up, down over time, but the overall trend stays relatively flat. Practically speaking, as long as my balance at any given time is about a paycheck's worth, paid bi-weekly, or more, I'm good. And if the balance is higher than about 3x a paycheck, I figure I've likely built up some excess I can put elsewhere. My bills payments are somewhat evenly spread across the month, so there are rarely really big drops over a day or two. Mortgage and our general spending, credit card are the biggest bills. And I've got those set up so there's practically always a paycheck in between them. I swap money out of my account for savings once my deposit hits, and then whatever is in there is used for bills and paying off my credit cards. I use credit cards for all of my purchases and then pay them off. I honestly don't keep a set amount in there. I always have enough to cover bills and spending. My credit union currently pays out 4% up to $15,000 in my main checking account. When it gets close to $15,000 I'll move over to HYSA. I have 2 HYSAs. Wealthfront is paying 5% and Vanguard is 4.7% currently. My wife and I aren't too strict with exact amounts, but we have an account where we try to keep 4 months worth of mortgage payments and expenses. We have other accounts, but leave that one only for that kind of thing. $200 to $500 for Venmo or whatever if needed. I get paid once a month. Pay everything including myself into savings. And leave a little in there. But really there are no unexpected expenses hitting my checking unless I'm pushing buttons. So what's the point of leaving stuff in there to earn nothing? I think much of this depends on how often you get paid. I get paid weekly, so I don't keep much. Just about 2K, and that's just in case I need extra cash for something. Everything left after paying CC bill. Yes, I pay it weekly based on what was charged. Gets transferred to brokerage settlement and then directed as needed. DD into checking. Transfer to HYSA everything except for a few hundred. Revolving credit card paid off every month from HYSA. All expenses, utilities, groceries, etc. are on revolving credit and for points. Always get enough points to pay for a vacation every summer or most of it. My checking account has an overdraft feature where it pulls necessary funds from my HYSA, so $0. I keep $1 in mine, then let overdraft protection pull it from savings when it's needed. I keep 1 month worth of expenses plus an extra $2 minus 3K buffer. The buffer is mostly so if there is a larger irregular payment, I don't have to worry about accidentally bouncing a payment. My floor is 3K. I treat that like zero. My account fluctuates each month between 3K and 9K. I have 3 separate DD at different times of the month. I set the 3K floor because my first of the month bills are about $2,400. So if my DD at the start of the month is delayed, there is still enough in the account to cover those payments. PNC Virtual Wallet gives you 3 accounts: checking, savings, and growth. The growth acts like a HYSA and pays approximately 4.5%. If your checking runs low, it automatically pulls from your growth. Food for thought. PNC is my brick and mortar. I do have the virtual wallet type account. I am getting 4.22%, 4.3% APY. On the growth account, I don't allow the growth account to be used as overdraft because I don't like giving my checking account access to 20 to 30K without my review. I live in a state where PNC has branches. I am getting the HYSA rate for some relationship reason. Supposedly most people in states like mine that have branches don't get the higher yield rates. My zip code is supposed to earn 0.02% on balance amounts under $2,500 and 0.03% on balance amounts $2,500 and over. ETA. You can use the URL below to check PNC rates in your location. Just sub in your zip code for the one in the URL. The example is for a zip in Oregon that gets 4.55%. 4.65% APY. At this time. https www.pnc.com/n/rate/virtual-wallet/97045/na https www.pnc.com/n/rate/virtual-wallet/97045/na. Well, monthly expenses are running at about $10,000 right now, so I like to try to keep a minimum after expenses buffer of around $20,000. This month was expensive, so had to go below that a bit. I keep 1.5 months worth of expenses in my checking to handle cash flow and to have a small buffer. I keep the rest in HYSAs or money market funds like VMFXX. My wife and I put our monthly expenses into a spreadsheet, forecasting forward 60 to 90 days. If we forecast that we have more than $2,000 after all the bills are paid, we move money out. And if we have less than $1,000 after all the bills are paid, we move money in. I've split my direct deposit automatically like this after 401k and taxes. The expected amount from my bills goes in checking, minus rent, plus $1,000 of just-in-case money in a decent HYSA. I have a debit card linked to these accounts. My calculated portion of rent goes in a joint account. The remaining balance goes into Wealthfront, which is my real HYSA. I have no debit card for this account even though it's a checking, savings combined. This is where the emergency fund and save up for some Ething fund is. And this is the account I use to buy equity once the emergency fund is adequate. That's 3 separate institutions, accounts. At the end of the month, if my just-in-case money does not get used, I transfer to Wealthfront. And if my emergency savings in Wealthfront is too high, I buy equity such as VTI at Schwab. That makes 4 accounts all with a purpose. I don't like automating this last part because it keeps me accountable on what I'm spending money on. $1,000 plus the bills that are due before my next paycheck. Not much. I used to keep tens of thousands in it, but I moved those funds to a HYSA a while back. I only keep something like $3,000 $4,000 in my checking now since interest rates are way better in a HYSA checking. *** typically around 2 to 4K, depending on when I've paid my CC bill. Savings tied to checking ACCT, approximately 500. HYSA, with a different bank, ideally 15K plus. But I just burned through much of that when I was between jobs. So building that up again now. Certificates of deposit, with the same bank as my IRA. Around 4K in short-term CDs. It's where I put my money before I opened my HYSA. CC balance. ****, I pay for 99% of my purchases with my CC and pay it off every couple of weeks fro. My checking so there's never accumulated debt. I'm hyper paranoid about having my main checking account hacked and my money going poof. I much prefer to spread it out among different banks and keep as little money in any given bank and rely on CC for most of my purchases. Reason being, money in the bank is **** my **** money. And credit from CC Bank is their **** money. They have better lawyers than I do when it comes for fighting for money back from criminals who done steal from us. I keep around $2,500 in my checking after all expenses are paid. Mortgage, daycare, credit cards, Roth contributions. My check goes to my checking. My wife and I have a joint checking we keep at around $8,000. That way we have plenty of liquid cash if something comes up. Everything else should be working for us in a brokerage or HYSA. Like $2,500. I used to try to over-optimize and keep everything in savings earning interest and then transfer in money to pay bills once a month or whatever. But then if I ever needed to Venmo a friend or someone I wouldn't have it in checking lol, so I stopped being cute. About $2,000. Everything else goes into a HYSA. All spending goes on credit cards and the monthly balances along with the mortgage are paid from the HYSA. Ally allows 10 transactions per month on their HYSA. More than enough to pay the Chase trifecta plus whatever other card we're churning that month from savings. The HYSA has 6 months of spending in it. Any extra money goes into an after-tax brokerage account. I try to keep my balance around $10,000. Any higher I transfer it somewhere. Married. 33 meters. With joint income of around $250K in NYC with no kids or debt. Only mortgage. I don't really check, but it's usually between $500 minus $1,500 after bills are paid. Usually 2 to 3K, but I also pay off my credit card constantly to keep me honest unless I need the extra time, but it's a slippery slope. HYS is at 5.5%, so all extra goes there. Checking account stays around $4,000. That is enough to cover our monthly credit card bills, etc. Over top of that is $20,000 in cash savings earning 5.21% in a HYSA. If I notice that 2 or 3 large bills coincided and the checking is lower than comfortable, I'll push it over. Then it's replenished over the next couple paychecks or so. Following that, everything goes to retirement or the below. Then there is a significant balance in a non-retirement brokerage I can sell if shit hits the fan. If we total a vehicle and the boiler breaks down, about 1.5 month expenses. Rest goes to EF in high yield. $20,000. Most of my emergency fund is there too. It gets like 5% interest right now. So I don't see any reason for another account. It could be anywhere between $1,500 to $7,500, depending on upcoming expenses. I have other accounts that hold small investments that I can move around if I need emergency funds. I invest aggressively enough that I more or less live paycheck to paycheck. So I don't keep more than a month or two of liquid cash usually. 1 to 2K. Mostly keep money in my HYSA. Overdraft is set to pull from the HYSA if checking doesn't have enough. I keep £1 and 1 penny in my check account. The day before XX is debited, I transfer the exact amount into my check account. This means all my cash earns the maximum possible interest in a high interest account. $5,000 max usually. For easy access. If I have a high credit card bill that month, I might keep more for buffer. But I try to move everything into at least a high-yield savings account, if not investments. No savings account BC. My checking account gets 4% interest, so the checking account is my emergency fund and regular spending account. All my pay is deposited there, and depending on laziness, I periodically trim it back down to $10,000 by moving money to other vessels. The rule of thumb is have a 3-month emergency fund of available money. Doesn't matter how you split it between HYSA and checking, other than you should probably choose the one with better interest. We like to keep a 1-month buffer. That way, if something disrupted income, we know the mortgage and other regular bills will still go through as planned while we figure out what we need to do. I float enough to cover line of credit payment, rent, and a pre-auth payment to insurance. The rest comes out of my credit card. If I have a real emergency, I'll pay with my credit card and pay it off from money from investment accounts. I get paid weekly. I keep just enough to cover next week's automatic allocations in case something happens. Anything above that goes to other savings. I don't keep anything in my checking account except maybe $200. I pay for everything on my credit card and pay it off when I get paid. I keep $500 in my savings account, and then everything else goes to my HYS account with a different bank. Any emergency arises, I can just transfer the money out of my HYS. After paying, budgeting for monthly bills, all auto-deducted on 1st or 15th, and including gas and food projections, I keep $500 in checking and roll the rest into my HYSA. I get paid at the end of the month, so I pay off my credit card and rent. Then the rest goes into Wealthsimple for emergency fund, TFSA for stocks depending how stocked the emerg fund is. I leave $200 to $400 in the checking account to cover any incidentals like e-transfers for friends, etc. I keep my money in multiple savings accounts. Car, health, vacation, gifts, etc. When it is direct deposited into my checking, I move it to the savings accounts and only keep $100 balance in checking. If I have to write a check, I'll transfer the money in from the appropriate savings account. I also have a $5,000 cash reserve attached to the checking, just in case. My mortgage is my largest expense typically, so I use that as sort of a barometer. When my mortgage payment comes out of my checking, I usually set it up to be the last day of the month. I like there to be exactly one additional mortgage payment worth of money still in there after it's sent. So at the end of the month, any amount above that extra buffer gets moved over to savings. From there, I deal with finances every 2 weeks on paycheck days. So I'm naturally getting my direct deposit before sending out CC payments, paid on full every 2 weeks. and setting up online bill pays for utilities, etc. A month of salary. At the end of the month I move everything left beyond the amount needed monthly for bills. I keep about $1,500 extra in there just as a buffer. The rest goes into savings. As far as I know, there is no rule of thumb on this per se. It probably falls under the emergency savings fund for each person, couple, entity. I don't really keep much at all. Maybe $50? I don't use my checking account for expenses though. That all goes on my credit card. Then every 2 weeks when I get paid, that 2 weeks balance gets paid in full. It's simple. $3,300 enters my checking account every 2 weeks. So roughly $6,600 per month. General expenses are roughly $5,000 per month plus other random shit that varies between $50 and $1,500. You get to decide what level of buffer you're comfortable with. I'm extremely risk averse, so I keep a minimum of $4,500 in my checking at all times. What that really looks like in practice is like this. Day 1 of the month comes around. E.g., there may be $8,000 in my account. By day 15, after a couple weeks of expenses, it may be down to $4,500. Then bam, I'm paid again. So it's back up to $7,500. By the end of the month after more expenses, it's down to, for example, $5,000. Then bam, next month hits and I'm back up to $8,000 or so. That's the level of buffer that makes me happy and comfortable. Never having below $4,000 to $5,000 in my account at all times. Always remember, personal finance is personal. I keep about $500 more than I need for normal expenses. Just in case. I transfer everything else out to savings, investments, etc. Around $15K. Mostly because I don't want to deal with transferring money all the time or accidental overdrafts. I get paid to my checking account twice per month. After I get paid, then pay my bills and throw about 10% of my pay into high-interest savings and Roth IRA. I am normally left with maybe $350 walking around money. If I have more than that, I throw more into high-interest savings. I get nothing in interest in my checking, so no good reason to keep much in there at any given time. I mainly use credit cards for everyday spending. My checking stays at about 1.5x my normal monthly spending. Doing this allows for me to easily cover for months where my spending is a little higher for whatever reason and I don't really have to babysit it throughout the month. Keep it at $1,000. Then at the end of the month I use what I made on top of that $1K to pay all my bills and credit I racked up. Any leftover goes to savings and some investments. I get my paycheck into my normal checking and pay bills out of that, including sending $400 every 2 weeks to my Ally Spending ACCT. I use that card for food, gas and all my fun stuff. This way I can track how much I spend every month and never worry about anything bouncing from the checking I pay bills out of. Just enough to cover any CC expenses that month, groceries, bills, gas, etc. I pay for most expenses using CC. For the points, whatever I spend, I pay off at end of month. If there is any leftover, I dump into savings and repeat the same cycle next month. I have a zero-base budget. I keep my biweekly budget necessity amount and $50 extra for unforeseen expenses in my regular checking, and everything else stays in HYSA. For me, $2K. Every time a paycheck hits, anything additional gets split between my mortgage account, a savings that I store my mortgage payment in, not an escrow ACCT, and my HYSA. I keep $2K in the checking because that's twice the amount necessary for a pay period worth of expenses. I keep just 200 to 300 over what I typically spend in a month in checking. But I keep the equivalent of one biweekly paycheck in the companion savings account that earns practically no interest, as a backup just in case a paycheck gets delayed for some reason. The rest that hasn't gone to my 401k gets direct deposited to HYSAs. It's easy enough to transfer money from those accounts if needed, and means I'm less likely to overspend when I can clearly see a low checking balance as each payday approaches. I think like a month and a half worth of expenses, so that's like 1 to 2k. 3k if I am expecting to have larger purchases for a particular month. The rest goes to my Roth IRA and MMF in Fidelity, which acts as my savings account. We use credit cards for everything, and they're on autopay out of the HYSA. So checking only has to have enough for the mortgage and a few utilities we can't pay with credit cards. Less than 10% of our cash on average. I like to keep $1,000 in my checking, $1,000 in my immediate savings. Everything else gets transferred to higher interest savings or investments. No rhyme or reason. Just what I apparently do without realizing it. I have an absolutely terrible spending habit. So only enough to make bills. Everything else that's not automatically pulled for other things. Brokerage account, 401k, insurance, gets pulled out in cash and put in a safe. I usually keep 15k in the safe. The rest is automated. Very little as money just rotates through checking account to bills, investments constantly. I have enough to cover the next month's expenses. We keep 2 checking accounts. One that holds all the money for the next month's expenses and then the other one lol. We have 4 paychecks per month. 2 incomes. So each paycheck, I transfer 25% of the next month's expenses into the bill account. Upon getting paid, I will immediately pay the monthly bills, rent, and typically transfer a consistent amount to savings. What I'm left with is money for food, gas, whatever until next paycheck, but a rule for myself is I don't like the balance to go below 2k before paychecks hit. It's personal preference, and I ought to lower it to 1k and put more into savings each time. The buffer provides some sense of security. $1,000. Enough to pay bills for a couple weeks. If my debit card gets compromised, I'm not losing much. Nearly zero. I use a credit card for almost 100% of purchases, and anything that uses debit rather than credit is timed with cash flows, asset sales, or interest payments. I have a retirement income account and I transfer money from that account into a debit checking account for living expenses. I try to maintain at $1,000 in that account. I'm hoping that offers some protection from someone hacking the debit account. If you don't run out of money, you're doing it right. All your leftover money should be going into a HYSA, and when you have 3 months' expenses in that, into investments. Enough to cover the next round of bills before I get my next paycheck. I level my checking out to $5,000 at each payday twice a month. This is usually transferring some to savings. The savings account has around $60 to $80k in it and serves as our emergency fund and big purchase cash flow buffer. I then move money back and forth between checking and savings as needed. 80% of my bills come in on the 1st, so enough to cover that full amount on the 30th. Then it replenishes as the month goes on. My paychecks are monthly and mortgage is bi-weekly. Half payments. So I try to keep 3 mortgage payments and a full month's of expenses. I keep like 1 to 3k since I have all my bills on autopay. The rest of it immediately goes towards mortgage, rent, and CC bills. Usually about 2x my monthly expenses. Mortgage is $1,500. CC usually $1,500. Car $900. Bills $500. Right now I have about $7,500 in there. The fear of an overdraft is enough to where I don't let it run much lower than $4,000 any time. I keep $300 plus whatever bills I have scheduled to pay. The $300 is so I can do math quickly, and if I screw up it doesn't matter. I'll fix it the next time I transfer. 1 month's expenses goes in at the first of the month and gets spent down to almost zero. So the average kept in there is 1 month's expenses, too. Less than $1,000 in primary bill checking. $10,000 in the attached saving in case something comes up that can't wait 3 days to transfer. All else in a 5% account if not invested. $60K in checking at the moment. Gotta stay liquid for great opportunities. Anywhere between $1,000 to $2,000. Direct deposit goes into my checking and immediately is sent to bills. Most of which is to my credit cards that I use for everyday spending and fully pay off each statement. Whatever is extra is put in the attached savings account purgatory, and then once I hit $2,000 I transfer $1,000 to my HYSA. My Roth, 403B and HSA contributions are all taken out of my pay automatically. About 2 months to cover anything unexpected. My checks are direct deposit to savings with a recurring monthly transfer to cover monthly expenses. I have about a year's expenses in regular savings plus CDs. And the same in investment. Not counting retirement funds set aside via deferred comp. There's a minimum of 1 month's expenses, which means at a high point sometimes it can be 2 months of expenses. I keep about a month's general expenses in there, and everything else will get spent or invested in a brokerage account. When I get paid, I look at a calendar that shows all of my bills paid via check. Mortgage, car, that will be due before I get paid again. This money stays in the checking. I then pay off all of my credit cards. Then transfer everything remaining to my HYSA. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I have $500, everything else is in retirement. Savings, emergency. I like having most of my money working for me.